It's entirely up to you.
Okay.
All right, welcome back, everyone. We'll just give a minute for people to join. Maybe everyone can just use like a thumbs up emoji or something like that to show us that you're here. Oh, awesome. Okay. That's good to know. We can never tell, so it's always nice to know that we're not just the only ones here in this session. So for this session today, we're taking things back to the foundations of why it is we're conducting pollinator habitat restoration on rights of way. And we're going to begin with our first speaker, Carolyn Callaghan, and we'll be followed up by Jeff Skevington. And then we'll have a period for questions after that. And so just before I pass the mic, as you can say, over to Carolyn, just want to share that Carolyn is CWF Senior Conservation Biologist for terrestrial wildlife, and she holds a PhD in wildlife ecology from the University of Guelph. Her primary area of focus is the conservation of biodiversity on working landscapes in Canada, including rights of way as well as agricultural land. And she and her collaborators look for compatibility with farming practices and business practices on rights of way, as well as the recovery of species at risk and threatened ecosystems. And Carolyn's work spans ecological research, government policy, and sustainable food indices. And I'll pass things over to Carolyn.
Thank you, Victoria. Good morning, everyone. I'll just try to share my screen. Can you see my screen now?
Not yet.
Okay. I see a wheel turning. Hopefully it will show up in a moment here. And now I can no longer see my share screen option.
So we're seeing what you're seeing. Oh, there we go. There it is.
Oh, beautiful. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Victoria, and good morning, everyone. I'll be speaking a bit about nature-based solutions and ecosystem services of native wildflower meadows. So 3 years ago in 2019, a really ground-shaking report on global biodiversity loss was released by the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform, known as IPBES, which is a collaboration of 139 member states. And this report, which was written by hundreds of scientists who are species experts, indicated that 1 million species of plants and animals are threatened with extinction. This report really woke the world up to the biodiversity crisis. It indicated that nature is declining globally at rates unprecedented in human history, and that land use change is driven primarily by agriculture, forestry, and urbanization is one of the main drivers. 1 month ago, the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, released its 6th assessment on climate change risk. And this report indicated that human-induced climate change is causing dangerous and widespread disruption in nature and affecting lives of billions of people. It indicated our actions of today will shape how people adapt to climate change and how nature responds to increasing risk from climate. And finally, and really importantly, this report recognizes the interdependence of climate, biodiversity, and people. And this is a really critical take-home message because biodiversity is our life support system. It's fundamental support to supporting our ability to produce food, clean water, and for the well-being of people. So biodiversity loss and increase in global warming is affecting the way we're able to produce food, to sustain clean water and human health. So there's an interconnected web between biodiversity, global warming, and the things that we need to keep us healthy. So the IPCC report had some very specific actionable items to help reverse the crisis of climate and biodiversity. And they include reducing habitat fragmentation, increasing natural habitat extent that we have, increasing the connectivity of those habitats, maintaining taxonomic, phylogenetic, and functional diversity. In other words, great species diversity and ecosystem diversity as well. So one of the ways that we can tackle this is through nature-based solutions. The IUCN identifies nature-based solutions as actions that protect and sustain and restore natural or modified ecosystems. And they clearly link societal challenges and of adaptivity and providing human well-being and biodiversity benefits. And what nature-based solutions specifically include would be protection of natural habitats, restoration of those habitats that are now degraded, ecosystem-based mitigation of climate change, so using plants to help store carbon, and then ecosystem-based adaptation to help us adapt to the extreme weather conditions that are arising because of climate change. And the benefits in nature-based solutions include, if we protect habitats, they will continue to store carbon. If we restore habitats, they'll be further drawing down of carbon from the atmosphere. And if we both protect and restore, the other services that we receive are reduced flood impact, erosion, drought, landslides, and we're able to maintain important services such as pollination. So this nature-based climate solutions is really gaining traction. There is a leaders pledge instigated by the UK a few years ago, which has been endorsed by heads of state of 93 governments. This includes a pledge for nature-based solutions. 2/3 of the signatory countries of the Paris Agreement have included nature-based solutions in their climate pledges. And thirdly, nature was a prominent in the UN COP26, which happened just October last year. So I want to speak specifically about meadow habitat. This is one type of nature-based solution. This is a beautiful example of the Meadowway in Toronto. Ecological services from native meadow habitat includes habitat for thousands of species, and we'll hear from Jeff in a minute about some example of those species. If we improve and maintain meadow habitat, it will enhance pollination services. So if we have a native meadow near a crop that needs insect pollination, we're improving pollination services. But it goes beyond crops. Most ecosystems need pollination services. If you go in a forest, the trees will flower in the spring and there are pollinators actually on those blossoms. Most ecosystems all ecosystems at a certain point need pollination services. Beyond that, we have reducing impact of flooding and reduce roadway runoff. Native meadows can help protect, stabilize soil and enhance and enrich soil. We heard from James Corcoran about the natural snow fence service that happens along roadsides with meadow habitat. And then last but certainly not least is carbon sequestration. So if you look at the profile photo at the drawing at the very bottom of the screen, on the very left is turf grass, almost no roots. And as you scroll to the right of all the various native plants, that's the richness of carbon storage. The deeper the root, the more carbon is stored. So turf grass in our business as usual, and many rights of way stores hardly any carbon. If we restore to native, there's quite a bit of carbon that can be stored. And so rights of way can provide landscape scale habitat connectivity in addition to the other ecosystem services that I mentioned. And habitat connectivity gets us at very large scale. If we're looking at restoring diversity, we need to be thinking big, and that's the beauty of our rights of way. We have many. And if we just look at this example, so here we are in Eastern Ontario, you can see Charleston Lake Provincial Park, Murphy's Point Provincial Park, and Frontenac Provincial Park. There's 233 square kilometers of potential habitat restoration on county and township roads in and around that region. And if they were restored to the point that you could be on the sight line, so 5 to 7 meters beyond the sight line, that would be equivalent to 2.7 times the area of these 3 provincial parks. So this is the scale, this is that scale that we're talking about. Here's another example, which James also spoke about, the highly degraded ecosystem of southwestern Ontario. You can see Chatham, Lake Erie, Lake St. Clair. Very few natural areas and parks, but a lot of roadways and a lot of hydro lines. So you can imagine that really important connectivity function of by restoring rights of way. So now we're in an exercise of imagining the great things that we can do together. In Canada, we have 1.02 million kilometers of roads, 232,000 kilometers of hydro lines, 117,000 kilometers of pipelines, plus more. We haven't included railway lines here. There are other rights of way. If we restored to the point at which we can along those roadways, we would have equivalent of 3 Prince Edward Islands in protected areas and restored natural meadow habitat, which is really impressive to be thinking about what we can do together. And if you're wondering, how am I going to pull this off? I don't have a budget to do it. It's going to take a lot of effort. Well, yesterday there was an important announcement by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. The 2030 emissions reductions plan was released. Within that plan, 2 points that are important for this audience: empowering communities to take climate action, $2.2 billion to support projects from government, schools, nonprofits, Indigenous communities. And number 2 is embracing the power of nature to fight climate change, $780 million to help our wetlands, peatlands, oceans, grasslands, and agricultural lands. And meadow habitat falls into that category to both capture and store carbon. So we're seeing a nod from the federal government that this is probably important work, and now we just have to collaborate together to make it happen. So thank you very much, and we'll turn it over to Jeff.
All right, thank you so much, Carolyn. I already see a comment here that someone would like a copy of this presentation, and I'd just like to say that this is really helpful information for organizations that are listening today, and particularly if you're in our regions where we're doing on-the-ground restoration, we would be happy to speak with your wider organizations too to share this information. All right. Okay. So now we are going to pass things on to Jeff. So Jeff Skevington is a research scientist at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. He is a specialist on fly taxonomy and phylogenetics and focuses on the fly families. Now, pardon my pronunciation, but this is a mouthful. Surfidae, which are the flower flies, and the Piponculidae, which is the big-headed flies. I hope I got that right, Jeff. His goal is to describe and make the diversity of these families accessible through scientific and popular publications, and his recent publication, Field Guide to Flowerflies of Northeastern North America, has made these important pollinator flies more accessible to everyone, and a high proportion of them are now field identifiable with this aid. So let's see here. Jeff, if you can unmute yourself.
Thanks, Victoria. I'm unmuted. And I'm trying to share my screen and I'm getting a message that Chrome is not allowed to share the screen to this app.
Interesting. Okay, well, I will share my screen then,
Thank
and
you.
you can just guide me when to turn to the next slide. So
Sure.
just take a moment here. All right, is everyone able to see that okay? Fantastic. All right.
Great. Okay. So, so my goal this morning is to try to feed some information into what Carolyn just was talking about and give you some idea about the kinds of animals that live in these right-of-ways. So, so a basic introduction to pollinator biology, natural history. So next. When we talk about pollination, the thing that comes to almost everybody's mind first is the honeybee. Honeybees ubiquitous. It's found around the world now, and but it's not native here. It's extremely important for agriculture. 39% of our agricultural crops are pollinated by honeybee. Makes sense. Our crops are largely non-native, and so it makes sense that a non-native animal's doing a lot of the heavy lifting. In terms of native habitats, right-of-ways, things like that, they're not significant. In fact, they're a serious invasive problem. They're competing with other species, native species, for resources. So, so I'm not a big fan of honeybee, although it's really important for agriculture. A lot of our native species could take its place. Next. And in fact, you know, this sort of thing warms my heart when I see it. This is an ambush bug taking out a honeybee. Next. Taking out the Euro trash, I suppose you could say. Next. So in terms of native bees, we've got an incredible diversity in Canada. There are over 800 species, next, of native bees, and they're extremely diverse in morphology, color. Much less known about these than about honeybee. I would say, 95% of the research on bees goes towards honeybee. A little bit goes towards native bees. But they're much more resilient, in terms of withstanding different aspects of climate change, habitat modifications, and things like that. And of course, there's lots and lots of potential species that are available for pollinating our native plants as well as agricultural plants. Next. When we think about pollinators, pollinator gardens, people often think about bees first and butterflies right hot on their heels. And in fact, they're often called butterfly gardens when people are creating them. There's funding for this sort of thing. We have a great diversity of butterflies in Canada. There are over 300 species, or about 300 species of butterflies in Canada. They're showy. People, for the most part, enjoy watching them in their gardens and like the idea of attracting them to their gardens. And of course, right-of-ways attract a lot of butterflies as well. One of the things that seems to be missed by many members of the public, next, is that butterflies are the adult and the larvae are plant eaters. Many of them are, in fact, minor pests. Some are more serious pests. Most are minor pests, but they're plant eaters. And so, so it always, the irony is not lost on me when people are trying to attract butterflies to their garden and they're out with their spray bottle killing caterpillars that are eating their plants. So this is the one thing that you have to sort of adjust your thinking when you're thinking about native plant gardening or right-of-ways. Insects eat plants, and if you don't see insect damage, you don't have a very healthy ecosystem. If you plant plants that are appropriate, that grow best in that habitat, you're not going to get that kind of devastation that you would with some crops, for example. So a good example, swamp milkweed, we saw that earlier, is a great plant to use in restorations and whatnot, but it likes its feet wet. And so if I grow it here in my yard in a wet spot, almost nothing eats it. But if I grow it up in the dry part of the yard, it grows fine, but it's absolutely hammered by different caterpillars and other predators or herbivores. Sorry. So anyways, kind of neat. Next. In addition to butterflies and bees, of course, there are thousands of other pollinators in Canada. There's lots of beetles. There are lots of moths that are pollinators, literally thousands of species. And of course, the moths are lost to most of us because they come to our gardens at night. They come to the right-of-ways at night, and we don't notice them as much. Some of them are diurnal. We see a few of these. And beetles, it's certain groups of beetles, like this longhorn beetle, that are specialized on flowers. And you can see by the amount of pollen on that animal's head and thorax, it's just covered. So they obviously are important as well. Next, I'm going to talk though mostly about flies. This is my thing. I work on flies, and for all of the research that's done on pollination, it's almost none that's done on flies. It's like 0.05% probably. It's and yet flies are our most important native pollinators. Next. One of the reasons I think that flies are overlooked is because a lot of them look like bees and wasps. So these are all flies in this picture, and most people at a glance in the garden would just assume these are bees and wasps doing their business and would overlook them. So 4 of these are flower flies, and the one on the bottom left is a soldier fly. Next. So I always get a kick out of this. I collect these sorts of things. This shows just how profound this mimicry confuses people, how profound this is. Just look at a few of the examples here that it's kind of a hoot. So that big sign, honeybee, that was in the UK, and that's a lovely flower fly. On the top left, gardener beware, you harming the bees. It's a flower fly. The most egregious one here, this book, Bees of the World, was O'Toole's sort of life work encapsulated in one book. And the publisher chose the cover image, I guess, from a stock image. And it's a housefly relative, not a bee at all. Of course, you've got your honey made by apparently flower flies. That would be novel. The great honeybee stories, a flower fly, and Monsanto's got a little bit in the news there with a flower fly. So anyways, you can see that mistaking flies for bees and wasps or vice versa is pretty common. Next. So I'm going to talk a fair bit about flower flies now, because this is the group that I specialize on. The heaviest lifters in terms of pollination. Flies, there's tons of different families of flies that are really, really important pollinators. But I'm going to focus on flower flies because they're one of the more conspicuous and important groups. Next. So how do you recognize them? If they look so much like bees and wasps a lot of the time, how can you tell that they're not? So one of the most straightforward ways to tell is that they have only 2 wings. Flies have 2 wings. Almost all other insects as adults have 4 wings. Now, unfortunately, some wasps pleat their wings together, so it's hard to tell they have 4. And not everyone wants to get in close and personal with a wasp, but you can often see what were the wings behind the wings. They're called halteres. You can see in the top right picture there. They're specialized organs that were formerly hind wings that are now gyroscopes, and they allow these animals to fly so well. Flower flies are also called hover flies. They're one of the best flyers in the animal kingdom. They're amazing to watch them hover and move around, and they're using these gyroscopes just like a helicopter would for movement and orientation. The way that you can always tell a flower fly from other groups is this thing called a spurious vein. It's a vein that has no start and end on the wing, and there's almost no other insects have it. So if you get up close and personal and you want to really check that you've got a flower fly, that's a way to do it. But overall, I find the gestalt, most of them have short antennae. The one in the picture I've got in the middle here has long antennae, but most have short little fly antennae, and that's one of the ways to tell. Next. So here's your test. I don't know if I can see the comments or not here. I was going to try to see the comments, but we'll just see if anyone has any idea. Throw it in the comments. How many species of flower fly are in this picture, and how many bees and wasps are there? Now, how can I see the chat?
So I can also help guide this, Jeff.
Thanks.
Not sure if you can see it on your right-hand side. There's a little bubble, but Just waiting for someone to respond. No, everyone's taking a few seconds to think about it.
Brave.
Okay, someone here. Oh, okay, it's coming in quickly. One said 2 of them are bees, the rest are flies. Another person's guessing 3. Someone's guessing 8.
All right.
Any other guesses? 2 flies, 4. A few votes for 3. Someone said 1.
There are 7.
Oh, we did have a winner. We had a few winners who said 7.
Very
We
good.
have, yep, we have Ross and we have Abby who said 7.
Awesome. So just a quick way to point out, so it really is amazing, the mimicry in this. Obviously, they're mimicking the wasps and bees. They've evolved this way because they get conveyed some degree of protection, right? Flies don't sting, they don't bite, but if they can look like something nasty that stings and bites, it protects them against bird predation primarily. So in this picture, from the top left, wasp, bee, fly, fly. Middle row, from the left, wasp, bee, fly, fly. Bottom row from the left, fly, 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 honeybee. Next. All right. So this is a huge group. Over 6,200 described species in the world. We think there's probably over 10,000 once we get them all described. That makes this group as diverse as birds on a global scale. In Canada, there are 537 species, also very comparable to the number of bird species that breed in Canada. So it's a big group. It's a lot of taxa for me to get my head around and study, but it's a lot of fun. It's what I do. Next. As adults, almost all flower flies do that. That's why they're well named. They're pollinators. They feed on nectar. They feed on pollen. They go flower to flower. They're really, really important in the ecosystem. A lot are hilltoppers. I'll tell you a bit about that in the next slide. And some are migratory, which is kind of cool. So like monarch butterflies, we know as migratory. There's some dragonflies that are, but not many people know that flower flies, some are as well. Next. So hilltopping, very briefly, is kind of a cool thing that a lot of people don't know about. The hill doesn't have to be a mountain. It doesn't have to be huge. It just has to be higher than the surrounding landscape. The males go to these sites to look for mates. You imagine you're a little fly. How do you find a mate? Well, if you feed on plants, it's easy to go to that plant. But if you don't feed on plants, you have to find each other, and they go to a landmark to do that often. And it's often a hilltop. And the more rare they are, the more important it is to go to this feature. Almost no one considers hilltops when they consider conservation. They're plunking towers on top so we can get mobile service and things like that. And they're really, really an understudied and very important conservation area, because imagine thousands of insects are going up there as their mating site. And if you disrupt the hilltop, it affects a lot of the local diversity. Next. So I want to talk about the larvae. So we always focus on adults and identify the adults and look at the adults, but the larvae do all kinds of cool things. So almost every group of insects, every family of insects does one thing as a larva. They have a shared common ancestor, and they all do one thing. Syrphids, flowerflies, are totally different in this way. It's unbelievable compared to most groups that they're so plastic in their larval ecology. They do almost everything you can imagine an insect would do. Some are plant feeders, some are ant predators, some are parasitoids, some live in rot holes and just everything imaginable. Some live in water and are filter feeders. It's an amazing array of natural histories that they have. Next. One big group called the Syrphinae, which is about a third of our species are in this group, are predators. And most of them are predators of soft-bodied insects like aphids. So this is really, really an added benefit. Wasps and bees, honeybee does something beneficial as a larva, right? Their hives are involved with producing honey and whatnot. But not many insects are beneficial both as larvae and adults, whereas a third of the syrphid species are. They're in your gardens feeding on aphids and other pests, and then the adults are pollinating plants. So double benefit. Next. A big group called the Aristallinae do a variety of things. Some are plant feeders, some are in aquatic ecosystems filter feeding. The one in the middle at the top there, those are called rat-tailed maggots. You might have seen those in your old biology text way back when. Anyways, they're filter feeders, and they're filtering bacteria out of the water. Next slide. They actually are really, really important. This is what some of them look like as adults. On the top left is an introduced one called Aristilus tenax, or the common drone fly. And the one on the bottom right is also introduced, another introduced species called a lagoon fly. These live in water, and they're in vast numbers, billions in sewage lagoons, filter feeding. They're really critically important to turn over and cleaning up sewage lagoons and other fetid water. So pollinators as adults, and again, beneficial as larvae. Next. So one of the things that has created, I think, a big impediment for the study of groups like flowerflies is that there was no way to identify them. Access to them was difficult. Without a name, you can't learn more about them, and with not being able to identify them is a problem. So we created this field guide and published it 2 years ago, and it's just like a bird guide. Next. If you look inside the book, you'll see that it's like a bird field guide. You've got pictures of the animals with field marks pointed out with arrows. We have maps of distribution and predicted distribution. The eyeball picture shows you can field identify this without having to catch the animal. If it has a microscope picture, it means you have to catch it and take it back to a lab, and almost none of them require that. Very few. You can field identify most. You have to collect some or catch some to see microscopic characters or in the field, but you can identify an awful lot of them. The gray silhouette is actual real size, life size, which is really helpful for identifying these as well. So anyways, we think this resource, well, we know this resource is making a difference. A lot more people are studying these animals. A lot more amateurs are interested in these animals. And we're learning, in the last 2 years, we've learned more about their distribution than we did in the last 150 years, because I think the field guide is helping people identify them. Next. So I just wanted to sort of finish up the talk talking about some other resources that are available. There's an online key to genera that's available. It's freely available. And this is really helpful because using a field guide, if anyone in the group has tried to learn birds or something like that, you realize the biggest job is learning the groups and learning the genera. So recognizing a finch, a warbler, or whatever. And it's the same with flies, with any group. And so this key will help navigate you through the genus. Next picture. And it uses, again, arrows and whatnot that guide you through the characters. It's definitely not as simple as using the field guide, but it's another resource to use. Next. And it doesn't go to species level, it just takes you to the genus. So I think it's really useful in tandem with the field guide for people getting started. And then once you learn the gestalts of all the different genera, you're off and running and you can identify the species easily. Next, using the field guide. Other resources in addition to that Canadian Journal of Arthropod Identification, where the field guide is, our bug guide, which is an awesome resource with lots of amateurs and professionals working together to help people identify things. And iNaturalist, which is amazing. That's on the left here. If you've never used it, you put it on your phone as an app. You take a picture of a leaf, an insect, a mammal, a bird, whatever, and the machine learning uses all the other photos in iNaturalist, and there are millions and millions, to create an idea of what the identification probably is. And then the community weighs in and tells you whether or not that was right. It's an amazing, amazing resource. And lots of flowerflies now are in there. We can identify them using iNaturalist. So that's another wonderful resource. And then there's DNA resources. If you're doing research and you want to identify eggs or larvae, there's no keys to these things, but you can now identify them because we've sequenced almost all of the Canadian species, and you can get to them that way. Next. So how does this work with rights of way? So the point is that we're not dealing with a small number of species, and we're dealing with thousands and thousands of species. And these rights of ways have a huge impact. Next. If we have a right of way that's just, mowed grass, monoculture almost, you can imagine that there might be 4 or 5 species of flowerflies at most there. The most ubiquitous species that can live in almost anywhere are there. As a corridor, it's actually a detriment because things might try to use the corridor and they desiccate because there's nowhere to hide or take cover. So, so having these diverse native plant corridors is allowing for thousands of species to move back and forth between habitats and to actually live and breed in these corridors as well. Next. I would guess that in a typical corridor in Ontario, you would have over 100 species of flower flies very easily. So that gives you a bit of an idea of the scale of difference. It's massive. Next. It's not just beneficial for nature in general, although it's super, super important to connect all these areas the way that Carolyn was showing, that these connect natural habitats. But it also provides some direct benefit to us in terms of pollination with respect to agriculture. The top left picture is a trap that we had set up studying these sorts of features last year. We were looking at the impact of hedgerows and other rights of way like this on the pollinators and how many pollinators, the abundance and diversity there were when you had these features and when you didn't. And it sure appears to make a huge difference having these features available. Next. So the last thing I want to leave you with is that rights of way are really important, but there's a lot we can do individually as well. If we plant native species in our yard instead of introduced species, and if we don't use insecticides in our yards, we're contributing to this network of native habitats and this network of corridors. Next. This was our house when we bought it back in the early 2000s with a monoculture grass front lawn and literally at most a half a dozen species of pollinator insects visiting it from time to time. Very, very sterile environment. And we put in some effort and planted native plants. Next. And now it looks like this. And there are literally over 1,000 species of insects using this. We get all kinds of native mammals and birds in the yard now. It's a wonderful little piece of habitat, and it's great to see so many people doing this now. It's all over the place around Ottawa where I live. You see naturalized gardens. It's fantastic. Next. So just to finish off, I just wanted to encourage anyone here to naturalize their yards. You can find native seeds in so many places now. And I wanted to just give credit to Henri Goulet and Steve Marshall, who provided most of the photos for this talk, and a few people on iNaturalist who generously share their photos through the Creative Commons license. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jeff. That was really fantastic. Your discussion on flies in particular, I think, is one that a lot can relate to. I know many receive comments from the public about not wanting specific pollinator patches for fear of bee stings and things like that, when so many of what we're seeing are really flies. So really fantastic. And we'll take a few questions, but I'm also just going to launch a poll at the same time. So let's see here. Ooh, okay, I got to scroll back a bit to take a look at these questions. Okay, hold on, they're moving. Okay, is there much uptake on iNaturalist?
Yes, so iNaturalist is a force to be reckoned with. It's amazing. It started out, it was, I think the programmers started in San Francisco, but we have a Canadian Wildlife Federation person that's working on iNaturalist now to be one of the Canada sort of nodes for it. And there are literally tens of thousands of contributors contributing millions and millions of records. It's amazing that the way it works is that if there are enough pictures of each species, then machine learning can actually recognize those and tell you what you've seen. And it's quite remarkable. Almost any plant you go out and photograph now in Canada, you can get a name on. It's remarkable for its ability to identify plants. Insects are still a bit hit and miss. It depends on the group. But flowerflies, because I think of the field guide in part and the interest in them now, there's enough material that a lot of them are identifiable through iNaturalist as well. Birds are almost 100%. If you put a bird photo in, even if it's a terrible photo, it's amazing how it can identify them. And then the way it works is that your peers using iNaturalist will wade in and say, I agree or I disagree and whatnot, and you get more feedback that way. So it's really big. It's worldwide, but it definitely has more users in North America than elsewhere.
All right, and we have a number of questions about the field guide as well. So someone kindly put the name there. We will also we have a recording of the session. We'll share that out in the post-session email in a few days. But also, Jeff, perhaps if you can send us the ISBN, that was another question, then we can include that as well so everyone can take a look. And then I just want to say thank you so much, both Jeff and Carolyn, for taking the time to sit with us today and share more with us about ecosystem services and about pollinators. There were a lot of questions that people really want this this presentation to look back on, so we'll certainly share those recordings. Next up, we're going to a panel discussion on communicating restoration with farmers as adjacent landowners. So we're all going to hop off and head on to that. So we'll see you soon.